"Have a seat, Mr. Costner. What brings you into the clinic today?" William Costner didn't appear to be a man who was used to looking so unsure of himself. He was a burly man in his late 40s, and Dr. Winters could see the scars on his hands from a life spent working. As he sat there in his plaid work shirt and Wrangler jeans, she thought he looked a little like Burt Reynolds, though definitely less handsome and more plain-faced. She had done her research. She knew that Mr. Costner owned a large ranch between Kashmir and Gainesville. She also knew that he supplied a lot of beef to the area, meaning his was not a small-time operation. His bill had been paid with a check, and he hadn't put down any insurance company, though she knew he had one. He had chosen to come to her instead of going to a therapist in his hometown. Mr. Costner was afraid that people would talk if they knew he'd been to a head shrinker, or whatever it was he called her inside his own head. Despite this, he had still come to see her, so it must have been important. "I dunno, maybe nothing. I saw something that kinda stuck with me. I need it gone, and they say you're good at that." Dr. Pamela Winter nodded, rising to get him some tea. "I'm very good at what I do. Won't you have some tea? I find it helps people relax and come to the heart of the problem." She held the cup out for him, but he hesitated before he took it. "It doesn't have nothing weird in it, does it?" Dr. Winter smiled. "It's ginseng, winter cherry, and all natural ingredients." He took it, and as the steam hit his nose, she saw him waggle his mustache a bit. He took a sip and closed his eyes as the wafted out from between his pursed lips. This was a man who clearly took his tea sweet and in a glass. Something like this would be exotic, a treat for his less than refined palate. It would also be the inn that Dr. Winter needed. "So," she said, returning to her seat, "tell me about what you'd like to forget." He looked into the tea, seeming unsure how to start. I know that something attacked me in the barn, and I'm afraid it might come back again. I've been a rancher my whole life. My father was a rancher, his grandfather was a rancher, and his grandfather was a stock lineman who was extremely knowledgeable when it came to breeding cows and horses. Much like his forebears, I'm a simple man who doesn't put a lot of stock in strange things. I ride my fence line every day to make sure that my grazing land is clear of breaks. I take my cows in when it's cold, and I let them stay in the field when it's warm. I know when to start looking for new calves, and I can pretty well tell you exactly when one's going to drop. I'm a God-fearing man, a patriot who gladly served in the Gulf War, and my neighbors will tell you I'm as reliable and sturdy as the fence post that I put in the ground. So, when one of my cows came up dead one morning, her neck oozing blood, I was a little perplexed. "What you reckon it is?" Randy asked, he and Jake standing on either side of the dead creature. Jake and Randy have been my farm hands for the last 5 years, and they've helped me with a lot of things in that time. This is definitely one of the stranger tasks I'd asked them to help with. By her markings, I thought this might be Clementine. She was a good breed cow, good producer when it came to milk, and just as dead regardless. I'd seen dead cows before, of course. It wasn't uncommon for animals to come and harry the herd, but they usually didn't do it like this. Hell, it had been years since a cow had been killed by some varmint at all. Last time had been a coyote pack that had gotten a little bigger than expected, and the game warden had put together a posse to smoke them out before they started killing people. The puncture wounds on her neck, though, made me think this was no coyote attack. "Not sure," I responded, bending down to look at the wound. It was nothing more than a pair of pinpricks, but they happened to be straight into the jugular vein. "Maybe it's one of them chupacabras," Jake said, Randy snorting as he shook his head. Yeah, sure. Little bugger came all the way from Mexico just to taste our fine Georgia beef. I turned as the hazard sirens beeped, seeing George backing up the flatbed towards the body. The noise drowned out the farmhands as they joked about different boogans that might have come out of the woods to eat poor old Clem, and I was glad. I didn't believe in any of that nonsense. Truth is usually worse. Truth was, it was probably some weirdos or a group of weirdos who like to mutilate livestock, and I would have to be on guard for the next few nights to see if they came back. Quit flapping your gums, boys. Let's get Clem out to pasture. Both hopped to, and with some help, and the help of the chains and winch in the back of the truck, we soon had her lying on the black metal bed. She almost looked like she was sleeping, and it was easy to forget she was dead, until you looked for the rise and fall of her chest. "Bring her into the barn, George," I said, drawing some looks from the other two. "You ain't gonna butcher her," Jake said. "She's been in the sun all morning, boss, and that meat's likely—" "No, I want to have a look at her wounds. If some animal did this, then there should be sign. If someone else did this, as I suspect, then there will be a very different sign. You and Randy go see to the cows while I have a look at poor old Clem." The young men snapped a salute as they went off to handle the livestock. I shook my head as the pair swaggered off. Had I ever been so full of myself, so drunk off my own existence? I suspected that I had once, but who could remember that far back? I climbed into the passenger seat of the flatbed and rode with George as we headed for the biggest of the barns. "So what do you reckon happened, boss?" George asked, wheeling out the cow pasture with a practiced ease. I liked my regular hands just fine, despite Jake and Randy being young enough to be my kids. Jake was a good stockman, having an eye for cow flesh despite his age, and Randy was my go-to man for breaking horses. George, however, was the most sensible of the three, and usually handled the numbers and the equipment for the farm. I'd started letting the kid keep the books for the place too, and it was amazing to see what he could do with that degree in accounting. "I reckon it's people. People happened," I answered solemnly. George looked at me uncertainly. "You think someone around here did it?" "I hope so," I said, as we pulled into the cool enclosure of the barn, "'cause otherwise something bit her and sucked her dry while she just stood there." I climbed out of the truck and went to look at poor dead Clementine. She had a pair of perfect puncture marks on her neck, and the skin around the wound was stained a deep red. Whatever had done this had drained her blood, and the lack of any on the ground made me think they had taken it with them. Why would they do that? 'Cause they're crazy, I thought. They were Satanists or witches or something else I didn't know, and they'd taken the cow's blood to do something unnatural with it. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to know why they had needed it, but I needed to know why they hadn't been more than a few splatters on the grass under her. "I don't understand how you could drain a whole cow with just 2 little pinholes," George said, looking over my shoulder. "How do you know they got the whole cow?" I asked, having come to the same conclusion, but wanting to know why he thought so. "Look at his skin. It's discolored. She's been drained out, but I just don't understand how. Draining a cow like this would take days. How did they accomplish it so quickly?" I nodded at his assessment, taking a knife from a nearby bench and returning to the corpse to confirm my suspicions. I ran it along the cow's stomach, the abdomen opening slowly as the guts slipped out. Not a drop of blood came with it. The organs looked oddly shriveled, oddly drawn, but still no blood came. I shook my head, making a few other cuts, but getting the same results. "I don't know," I said to George, "but they were very thorough. Take her to the east field, George. Put her as close to the woods as you can get her. Soon as she's off the property, the better." I watched as the flatbed rolled away, not sure what to make of all of it. The sight of the bloodless cow would haunt me for the rest of the day, and that was why I was awake that night as my wife snored beside me. It had been a long day with no answers, and I doubted I would ever discover what had been done to Clementine. The ceiling certainly was offering none as I lay staring at the popcorn ridges that hung up there. I yawned as my tired eyes begged for reprieve. Someone had killed one of my cows, drained her dry while I was asleep, and I knew that it might very well happen again. How could people have done that? I knew what it looked like. I wasn't blind to the punctures that had gone right into the jugular vein, but it was impossible to imagine something like that existing. Stuff like that was in horror movies, not real life. I yawned again, just starting to let my eyes shut as the soft noise of my wife's snores lulled me to sleep. That's when I heard the harsh sound of a cow in distress. It cut across my sleep like a razor, and my eyes popped open as I slid quickly out of bed. I considered getting dressed, but decided against it pretty quickly. I needed to be quick if I was going to catch him. I grabbed my shotgun and headed out into the night, my pajama pants clinging to me as my bare chest prickled in the slight chill of early morning. I was heading for the milk shed, but when I heard the sound again, I turned my attention to the third and smallest of the sheds, the birthing shed. When I catch the cows in time, I like to put them in there to calf so that I don't lose one to varmints or the cold by accident. At that moment I had 3 cows in there ready to calf, and whatever was killing them had decided this was the best place to find its next target. I came into the shed, gun barrel leading the way, and nearly dropped it on the chaff. What I saw haunts me even now. It was a woman. She was dressed in a sheer black thing, her raven hair billowing behind her, her pale skin nearly glistening in the moonlight coming through the nearby window. It wasn't a skin that filled me with dread, though. Her jaw was open, unhinged like a snake, and her face was strangely elongated by this action. She had 4 fangs the size of pencils jutting from her jaw. Her red eyes had turned to look at me, and I saw the blood falling to the floor as Gertrude bawled pitifully. She turned back to the cow and wrapped her mouth around the wound, drinking the blood as it oozed out. There was a shivering new calf on the ground beneath her, and Gertrude seemed to be trying to protect it, even as her blood dribbled into the mouth of this haunting creature. I lifted the gun and pointed it at the woman, told her to get the hell away from that cow. She hissed at me, sending more blood to the hay, and when she bent towards me, I'm not ashamed to say that I cowered away from her. I lifted the gun, prepared to fire, but as she loomed over me with her strange mouth opened wide, she suddenly seemed unsure of herself. She pulled back, closing her eyes as she tried to stop herself before she struck me, and then bent like a shadow on the side of a house as she folded out the open door. I sat for a count of 5, trying to get myself under control before I could get enough strength in my legs to help Gertrude. I put some pressure on the wound, and it started to clot. I heard the cow bawl quietly again. I sat there in the shed and held pressure on her neck until I was sure she wouldn't bleed to death, and then I rushed to the big barn to get the first aid kit so I could clean and cover the wound. Gertrude didn't like that much, but she allowed it, and as I watched her care for her new calf, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. That was a few weeks ago. The strange woman hasn't been back since. Not in the flesh, anyway. While I sleep, I dream about her terrible face and frightening presence. I awake screaming some nights, but I cannot tell my wife why. Better to keep the burden with me forever than to let it infect her too, though it threatens to haunt me forever." He leaned forward then, making a glooping sound as he pushed the black lump out of his throat. As he sat quietly, Dr. Winter took the cup and poured the lump into a jar as she always did. She set it with the others in there, and as she washed the cup, she thought about the farmer and what he had told her. Black hair, pale skin, red eyes. Curious. Very curious. Mr. Costner shook his head like a dog as he came out, looking around as if he wasn't sure where he was. Did it work?" he asked, though by the sound of it he wasn't sure what it was. "Yes, sir. I don't think those pesky nightmares will bother you anymore. I'd like to ask, Mr. Costner, could you use a good dog for your farm?" The man cocked his head. "Why, yes, actually. I recently had one of my younger ones die when a cow kicked him, and I was hoping to replace him with something a little bigger." Dr. Winter wrote down the address and a name of a client she knew who would appreciate the business. "Talk to this man and tell him I sent you. I think your nighttime worries will be a thing of the past with one of his dogs watching over your property." Mr. Costner nodded, thanking her as he left. Pamela waved as he headed for the reception desk, letting the door close behind him as she reached for her cell phone. Marguerite picked up on the third ring. "Hello, my dear. Is everything okay?" Pamela smiled. She loved the way Maggie talked. "I heard through the grapevine that you paid a visit to the Costner ranch a few weeks ago." Marguerite laughed, and it sounded merry. "You must have been talking to that farmer I nearly ate. I managed to make him forget, but he's going to talk to Sinclair about getting one of his hybrid beasts." Maggie scoffed like a moody teen. "I was not planning to return after being caught." "Honestly, Maggie, I don't understand why you don't just eat deer like the vampires in those novels you love so much," Winter said, taking a seat on the still warm couch. "Oh, this may work for the Cullens, but the deer is so gamey. His cows were raised with love, and they tasted delicious." She sounded like she was salivating as she remembered it. "It's the third one this year, Maggie. I appreciate the business, but you have to be more careful. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you." "Fear not, mon cher. I'm harder to kill than that." Winter smiled. "I should hope so. Will I see you for dinner tonight?" "I wouldn't miss our date night for the world. See you then, my love." Winter hung up and got herself in order before her next client came in. God forbid they see the slight color in her cheeks and think that she was human after all. "You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.